FCS Financial is the oldest farmer-owned agricultural lender in Missouri. Our journey began when President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Farm Loan Act on July 17, 1916, creating the Farm Credit System. FCS Financial, a member of that system, is a cooperative focused on serving our member owners by providing flexible financial solutions through all economic cycles, today and tomorrow. We don't just offer money. We offer you a business relationship with the resources you need to succeed and thrive. Our employees not only work in rural Missouri, but they live there too. They understand agriculture and have the same dedication to the rural way of life that you do. Our cooperative stands on solid financial footing, serving you and thousands of member owners in nearly all Missouri counties. That strength positions us for a future that is focused on you and your rural community. We are Missouri Agriculture. Our vast array of loans and insurance products serve all facets of Missouri agriculture. All loans are customized to meet your specific needs. We realize agriculture is cyclical and no two farms are the same. Recognizing the diversity of Missouri agriculture allows us to grow relationships with our member owners to create new opportunities. We are a cooperative. As an FCS Financial customer, you become a member owner through the purchase of stock. Through board elections, you can actively participate in setting policies and making decisions for the organization. FCS Financial's cooperative structure allows you to share in our success through patronage payments. We've returned millions since 2006 to benefit our member owners. We honor our legacy customers. These customers have multiple generations of family members who are FCS Financial member owners. Just like them, we weather the cycles of agriculture and are stronger because of what we have learned. We provide educational opportunities for all farmers and ranchers every year. Knowledge helps everyone make better decisions. We want you to be armed with the most current, valuable information available. We are community. As a cooperative, we provide our employees with resources to help charitable organizations. In addition to financial support, our employees volunteer hundreds of hours each year in rural communities. We want these communities to thrive and grow, not just because it makes good business sense, but because we call them home too. FCS Financial provides funds and resources to a variety of charitable organizations that benefit rural Missouri. We are dedicated to being a good neighbor and helping when we can. We are focused on the future. We understand that the future of rural communities and agriculture is in the hands of our youth. FCS Financial provides scholarships, community grants for 4-H and FFA, and up-to-date curriculum for vocational agriculture to reflect the changing agricultural industry. Our Connect program prepares young, beginning farmers as they launch their production agriculture careers. We believe building leaders ensures a strong future for our industry. For more than a century, FCS Financial has built a reputation for growing relationships and creating opportunities for Missouri farmers, ranchers, and communities. We're proud of our past and excited to see what the future holds.
Hello and welcome to our first ever digital FCS Financial Ag Symposium. While we obviously would prefer an in-person meeting with networking and laughter, given the situation, hosting a virtual meeting allows us to continue to provide timely and important information that you can use on your farm right now. My name is Mark Jeffries, and before we go any further, we just need to do this. I'm sure you'll understand. Social distancing measures. Let me just see. Yeah, that's fine. I think we're far enough apart. So, believe it or not, this is actually what I do for a living. I normally, when there isn't a pandemic on, race around the world, standing on stages and driving conversations and running events, and I just absolutely love the business. Didn't start this way though. Given that we're going to spend a bit of time together, I'll give you my background. As you can tell, I'm British. I'm a full-on American now. More on that later on, of course. But my very first job was actually as a stockbroker in the United Kingdom. By training, I'm an economist. And I will never forget my first day on the job. I was so excited. Day one, I'm in my new suit, my shiny shoes, can't wait to get going in finance. Day one also happened to be Black Monday, 1987. And for those of you who were just too young to remember, this was a day, of course, when stock markets around the world dropped between 20 and 40% in a single trading session. And I remember looking around the room thinking, do people cry every day on this job, or is it just today? Anyway, I stuck it out for about 7 or 8 years, woke up one morning, realized I was in the wrong industry altogether, so I left stockbroking behind, made a very natural transition into hosting TV shows in the United Kingdom, and I'll be honest with you, I specialized in television that nobody ever watched. It was all financial stuff, but then came the next change. I did a lot of cheap TV, and cheap TV, as you know, is interview television. I would interview all these executive types, and at the end of the interview, at the commercial break, they'd lean over, give me their business card and go, Mark, you know, you're rather good at this. Would you come and do this at our live corporate event? So I tried it out. I fell in love with the live audience experience. I left television behind. Nobody noticed. Fast forward 25 years. That is how I'm lucky enough to be in front of you right now. So there you go. You know now. Here are a few things also to know about today. We hope you enjoyed, by the way, the box of summer sausages and cheeses that arrived last week. Also in that box, you may have noticed an agenda. Now, if you don't have that handy, don't worry. On the left-hand side of your screen is a link to it. Click on that and you will see everything that we have lined up. By the way, we'll host 2 speakers each night, and we hope you can join for both. And also, more information about each speaker is available in the symposium program, which is located in the downloads section, so you can do all the research. Also in that section is a flyer on upcoming events, and this flyer includes more information about any of the promo ads that you see during this event. Now, if you suddenly find yourself burning with a question, the good news is you can submit your question for the speakers or FCS Financial during the event itself. We will get answers for you after the event is over. The speakers, by the way, are encouraging questions, so don't hold back. If you experience any technical difficulties during the event, just click the Help button and someone will assist you. First up today, David Janisch is Chief Executive Officer of FCS Financial. He oversees the strategic goals of the organization and makes sure customers are receiving innovative and high-quality financial services. David began his career as an information technology analyst with the Farm Credit Bank of Omaha. He later became the Vice President of Information Services at the Farm Credit Bank of Wichita. He also held executive-level positions with Agvantis Inc. and US Ag Bank FCB, which, as you know, later became CoBank. He became CEO of FCS Financial in 2013. David grew up on a 2,000-acre farm near Kimball, South Dakota, where his family grew corn, wheat, alfalfa, hay, milo, and oats, in addition to running a cow-calf enterprise. His father was a farm credit borrower for more than 30 years and helped him get started in farming. David, over to you.
Good evening. I'm Dave Janisch, CEO of FCS Financial. Welcome to our virtual Ag Seminar. I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day today and spend time with us this evening. Obviously, this is a different format than we generally have for Ag Symposium, but we really feel that education and knowledge sharing is an important part of our cooperative mission. So rather than cancel the Ag Symposium this year, we changed the format to keep everyone safe. I believe it'll still provide the same great information you would normally have gotten. You'll just get it delivered to you in the comfort of your own home. Now, 2020 was an interesting year. I think we can all agree to that. As I think back to the beginning of last year and the things I was considering in my own personal and business, a global pandemic that dominated news headlines, drove government policy, and impacted agriculture in virtually all areas certainly wasn't on my mind, yet that's what we got in 2020. COVID impacted really all aspects of our lives. It changed the way companies, including FCS Financial, had to operate. If you couldn't adapt, you could potentially be out of business. I think we all can probably imagine stores and other businesses that maybe we are familiar with that couldn't or didn't adapt fast enough and had challenges during this environment. Now at FCS Financial, as I said, we made some changes. We wanted to protect our employees and our members. We limited access to our offices. We only met face-to-face by appointment only. And we really utilized technology more heavily to deliver products and services to our members. Our goal was to strike the right balance between protecting our staff and meeting the needs of our members, and hopefully we accomplished that. Now, these decisions weren't easy. They weren't always popular. At times they were inconvenient, but generally our members were understanding and supportive of these actions, and we really do appreciate that. So thank you for working with us during this time and continuing the relationship that we have. Now, I'd mentioned we increased our use of technology, and this certainly isn't a new movement. The move to online services has really been going on for some time. We probably all use technology for a variety of reasons, including banking services, ordering ag supplies or fertilizer. But COVID really accelerated that change in the world. I like to say that it moved the calendar forward on us, not by days, not by weeks, not by months, but by years. I think we've all heard stories of companies that were contemplating changes into the future that to respond to the current environment had to implement those changes in weeks. I think that's the type of impact that this pandemic had on our lives in 2020. Now, FCS Financial will continue to expand and enhance our online capabilities, but not to replace the relationship and customer experience that you have with us. It's really intended to provide greater access and better services to you as our members. Right now, I'd like to change gears on you a little bit and make a few brief comments about your cooperative. And I do emphasize the word your cooperative. You elect a board of directors whose primary responsibility is to ensure that this cooperative is run in its members' best interests. My responsibility and the management team's responsibility is to create initiatives and strategies that fulfill that objective. Now, we haven't officially closed the books on 2020, so I can't give you exact numbers, but indications are we're going to have a great year. Our loan portfolio will grow somewhere between 8 and 10%. We're nearing $5 billion in total assets. Our credit quality remained very stable with acceptable volume, about 95% of our total loan volume. And it looks like we're going to have record earnings. Certainly we had some headwinds in 2020, but this environment also provided us some opportunities. Demand for credit was really across all of our market segments. So as you look at our agribusiness and commercial farmer, traditional and part-time farmer, and capital markets group, all of them had solid growth. So we had really balanced growth across the entire portfolio. The low interest rate environment that we had in 2020 provided ample opportunity to convert and refinance loans at very attractive longer-term fixed rates. Our loan officers took advantage of this. They identified opportunities and worked with our members to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think as a result, saved our members interest cost. And also through this process, we were able to restructure some loans to provide additional flexibility to certain members. In addition, we had good government support. Programs like the Payroll Protection Program, B&I loan guarantees, Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, all provided timely and well-needed support to our members. These programs really provided a bridge to the future for many of our members. These factors, plus many others, contributed to making 2020 a really exceptional year for FCS Financial. So going into 2021, FCS Financial is well positioned for the future. We have strong capital, sound credit quality and risk management practices, solid earnings, and a really great reputation in the marketplace, which I believe positions us very well to fulfill our mission of being a consistent and affordable source of financing for Missouri agriculture. Now the really good news. Hopefully we can all agree that patronage is a significant member benefit of being a member of FCS Financial and really sets us apart from other lenders. If we were all in the same room, I would ask for a show of hands of who else has a lender that sends them a check each year that offsets some of their interest cost. And I envision that there wouldn't be very many hands raised in the audience right now. But at our December meeting, the FCS Financial Board declared a $30.7 million patronage to be returned to our members from our 2020 earnings. That's roughly equivalent to a 95 basis point or almost 1% back on average borrowings from FCS Financial. Now, your number may not be 95 basis points. It may be higher, may be lower, but I really believe that provides you an indication of the value of the relationship with FCS Financial. With this distribution since 2006, FCS Financial will have returned nearly $180 million back to our members. These are dollars that our members can reinvest in their operations or buy products and services from local businesses which support their rural communities. March 23rd, which is National Ag Day, we set aside as our Customer Appreciation Day, and on that day we'll begin distributing checks. Additional information will be coming out in the near future, and I'm sure our loan officers and our local branch staff will be talking with you about this in the near future as well. So in closing, thanks for accepting our invitation to tonight's symposium. Your relationship is extremely important to us, and we sincerely appreciate you choosing FCS Financial to provide your ag financing needs. Thanks again, and I wish you a prosperous and healthy 2021.
Thank you, David. Now, our next speaker is Steve Lurch. Steve is a digital strategy and marketing consultant and an award-winning international public speaker. He spent 9 years working for Google before founding Story Arc Consulting, where he brings his unique perspective to companies and organizations as both a speaker and as a marketing and digital strategy advisor. Over the last decade, Steve has had the opportunity to help build digital strategies for some of the world's foremost consumer electronics brands, as well as federal government agencies like the US Census and FEMA. Since 2015, Steve has specialized in the food and agriculture space, working hand in hand with USDA checkoff programs like the National Pork Board, Avocados from Mexico, Milk Pep, American Egg Board, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Please welcome Steve Lurch.
Thank you very much, Mark, and hello to everyone. Thank you all so much for having me. I am really excited to be here. As you just heard, my name is Steve Lurch, and I come from a background of technology and digital and marketing, and up until about 6 years ago, not agriculture. However, one of the reasons I say that I am so excited to be here with you all is that my wife, who did grow up on a multi-generation farm in West Texas where they grew peanuts and cotton, well, her whole family are farm credit customers. So I'm excited to be here and support the farm credit system, which I know is something that she really, truly believes in. Now, most of my time is spent helping all sorts of different organizations and individuals understand and leverage all the changes that are happening in our modern world. And today, I want to talk to you all about modern consumers, specifically those buying food, which I guess really is all of us, the people that are buying the end result of the products you produce. And if there is one thing I want you to take away from today, it's that as the world changes, your end customers are becoming more and more powerful, more and more demanding, and it is more important than ever for everyone in the supply chain, including farmers, to have a perspective and a voice when it comes to these consumers. Now, you've already heard a bit about my background, so I'll hit this real quick. I spent 9 years working for Google, building digital strategies for tech companies, nonprofits, the federal government, and then eventually for USDA checkoff programs. I started StoryArc Consulting 2 years ago and now spend half my time helping organizations like the ones you see here with strategic planning and marketing consulting. And the other half of my time I spend doing things like this. I travel around the world, either in person or more virtually here in 2020, and I speak at events like this one. But that's enough talk about me. Let's talk about all of you. Let's talk about the American farmer, and why I am so insistent on the fact that you all need to start looking at consumers a little differently. You need to change and to evolve. And well, it's mostly because it's never been more challenging to be a farmer, and I'm sure some of you can relate to that. If you go back just 85 years, this country had around 7 million farmers feeding only around 120 million people. Today, we have 2.5 million farmers feeding over 300 million people, not to mention the massive global exports. When this country was founded, Thomas Jefferson actually had this idea that the entire country should be individual, self-sustaining farms. In other words, each farmer just had to feed their family. That was his version for sort of the American dream, his vision for America. Clearly, you all are being asked to do a lot more than that today. And it's not just that there are more people to feed and less farmers, it's that the people themselves, the people you're feeding, they are pickier and more complicated than ever before. And it seems like every day there is a new hot button issue where a significant set of the population all of a sudden says, hey, I'm only eating organic now, or I only want cage-free now, or I only want plant-based, or I don't eat GMOs. What makes this even harder for the food industry to keep up with is that many of these consumers, well, they're confused about the very things they care about. So I want to show you my first video here. This is a clip from the Jimmy Kimmel Show. He sent someone out on the street to ask people if they avoid eating GMOs and avoid feeding GMOs to their family. And as a follow-up, he asked those same people what GMOs are and what GMO stands for. And I want to show you two of my favorite responses to that question.
Do you try to avoid GMOs in your diet?
Absolutely.
Why?
Because they're not good for you.
What is a GMO?
It's genetically I don't know, what is it?
If you are eating whole foods, you want to eat what you're eating. You know what I mean? You want to eat what you see. And so, and you're avoiding processed food, but when the whole food is somehow contaminated, that's kind of making it a moot point.
What does GMO stand for?
Genetically manufactured. Oh.
And the videos can be funny, and I think it is, and I'm sure they picked the funniest responses, but I think those are representative of a lot of people in this country. And again, it's so hard for us in the food system to sell to these people, to market to these people, to educate these people when they're constantly saying we care about a new thing today, whether we understand it or not, we care about it. And I'll show you one other video sort of on the same sort of line of thinking here. It's a video from a YouTuber named Luke Garman, and he created this video on sort of food trends and fads, and it's meant to represent the idea that we've all got those friends and what it's like to have those friends who are always trying to keep up with the latest health food fad. And again, even though they might not always understand it, and just how quickly they jump from one to the next. So I'll show you this video from Luke Garman.
Kimchi is actually super easy to make. You just throw cabbage into a mason jar and then you forget about it until you clean out your pantry next. Well, it actually turns out that there's a difference between pickling things and fermentation, so I have no idea what's happened to these vegetables. I've tried kombucha before. Kombucha is amazing. It's sweet tea that you let sit with an alien inside of it until it turns into a probiotic. Yeah, it works because of science. These are kale chips. I don't really know how they're chips, but it's kale. I sprinkle a little bit of kale on everything just on principle. Have you tried beets? Have you ever had a beet salad? Beets are basically like potatoes' older brothers that didn't drop out of college. I've been starting my mornings out with hot water and then cayenne and lemon. Have you done hot water and turmeric? It's a really simple thing to do in the mornings. You boil water and then you squeeze a whole lemon in, and then I use my Ouija board to infuse the spirit of my forefathers into it. It's really good for your GI tract. I'm a vegetarian. I'm an ovo-vegetarian. It's like a lacto-vegetarian. I don't do milk, but I do eat eggs sometimes. I'm doing a vegan diet right now. I was traditional vegan for a little while, but now I'm raw vegan because I burnt my hand while I was making some stir fry once, and I never switched back to cooking things after that. Well, no, I'm pescatarian now. It's basically vegan and vegetarian, but you still eat fish because omega-3s are really good for you, but I also don't think fish count as animals. I've been meal prepping like crazy. Meal prepping's awesome because it saves you a bunch of time and money, and you only have to be sad once that you're not having tacos instead of like 5 times. I'm doing this new paleo diet actually. Yeah, I'm paleo now. Me and my girlfriend are doing this keto diet. I thought she was signing me up for a martial arts class, but then she took away my bread. Yeah, have you tried eating pita bread instead of white bread before? Yeah, I was eating that all the time. Then it turns out pita bread is the same as normal bread, it's just flat. But have you had whole wheat bread before? But I was actually just reading, it turns out whole wheat bread isn't any different. It's just brown. Have you had sourdough bread before? Sourdough has to go through like a whole fermentation process and all that, which takes out the carbs. Yeah, I've been doing this diet where you only eat fermented things. You ferment like potatoes and barley and agave and wheat. They have support groups for people who've been doing the diet for a really long time, called like AA, I think. I'm actually gluten-free. I don't have celiac, I just feel a lot better when I eat gluten-free. It's mainly because I stop emotionally eating Krispy Kreme every time the hot donut sign's on. Yeah, I actually just got this new protein powder that's 100% whey. Actually, I just switched protein powder. It turns out whey is milk, and since dairy's evil, I switched to a plant-based protein. Plant-based protein actually tasted like the backyard, so I just switched to a bone broth protein. It seems like that's what a caveman wanted in a protein if he got to pick one. I switched to soy milk for a little while, but it turns out if you're a man and you drink soy, then you can actually start your period. Have you had cashew milk before? Have you had coconut milk before? Pretty much in love with almond milk. I pretty much only drink this coconut almond milk blend. It's amazing. I mean, really, at the end of the day, eating healthy just comes down to moderation and balance.
And now obviously that video is a little bit exaggerated, but I'm sure we can all imagine a friend who would tell us about some new diet fad they were on or some new trend and saying it works because of science, right? I've definitely got a few of those friends myself. I can very much imagine them saying that. Now, what further makes it hard for people in the food and agriculture industry to keep up with these rapid changes is that consumers are getting their information from new sources, some reliable, some questionable. Consumers are being influenced in ways we never would have predicted. Take diets, for example. These are the most searched for diets in 2018 on Google. And number 2 on the list, as you can see here, is the do-brow diet. And these are the do-brows. Now, it's possible some of you might recognize them, especially if you are heavy watchers of reality television. Terry is a plastic surgeon who was on the reality TV show Botched, and Heather is a former Real Housewife of Orange County. So a diet that reached literally millions of people in 2018, the second most searched for diet in the country that influenced what millions of people ate and bought at grocery stores, came from a Real Housewife of Orange County. And to me, and maybe to some of you, that sounds crazy, but it's the reality we live in. Technology has given megaphones to all sorts of new voices, and it's given consumers various platforms to consume new content, to get new information, to be influenced. And as the world gets smaller, as digital tools and technology become more prevalent, customers have the ability to search for and to buy any products they want from anyone they want, from anywhere in the world. They're not confined to only their local growers and only their local retailers. That's not the way it works. The world has gotten smaller. So these customers who are confused about what they want, who are always on to the next trend or the next fad, who are listening to voices that we never before thought of as experts, like Real Housewives of Orange County. These consumers are making demands, and you all need to pay attention to them. And you probably think I'm way over here on the left of this graphic and on this side of the supply chain, and these diets and these trends and these annoyingly flighty, confused consumers are way over here on the right. I've got any number of intermediaries between me and my consumers, and those intermediaries, they're the ones who have to sell, right? They're the ones who have to understand this stuff. I'm just one part of this whole big supply chain. And I'd probably argue that that was never really entirely true. But to whatever extent it might have been true in the past, I'll tell you for certain that our supply chains are changing, that they've been changing for years, and that COVID is just the latest sort of accelerator of those changes. As a country, we saw food supply chain issues on the news in a major way for the first time in some of our lifetimes. Meat processing plants and dairy distributors were part of a national conversation as consumers across the country had some of their first ever experiences with walking into a grocery store with sporadically empty shelves. It was a strange and memorable experience for a lot of people. And we saw consumers start to change the way they interacted with the supply chain in a major and in a quantifiable way. You know, e-commerce has long since kind of taken over our country, but the grocery category was slow to follow. Right. This is the percentage of grocery sales in 2019 versus 2020 that came from online sources. You can see it tripled this year, and it's projected to only continue on this aggressive trajectory moving forward. And it's not just cutting out the grocery store. Consumers are cutting out middlemen of the food system at higher rates than ever before. You see this article from Forbes about farms that sell directly to consumers. And just like on the consumer side, where they're trying to cut out the middlemen in the food system, many on the production side are doing the exact same thing and seeing success. The data speaks for itself. But I can tell you from sort of an anecdotal evidence that I've worked in the past year with everyone from the National Pork Board to the Plant-Based Foods Association on helping to build up digital literacy and e-commerce skills among farmers and other small companies who never traditionally sold directly to consumers and never interacted directly with consumers at all. And suddenly that's becoming a major priority. And part of the reason beyond just COVID, beyond just the coronavirus, is that technology is changing the lives and the behaviors of our consumers. Technology is finally catching up with the insanely daunting expectations of consumers. We already talked about all the demands modern consumers have on the products they buy, right? And it's got to be local or humanely raised or GMO free or keto or gluten free and on, right? We've got all these demands. So it shouldn't be that hard for anyone in this room or anyone watching right now at home to understand that we are approaching a world where a majority of shoppers are going to walk in to a grocery store and scan every single item they put in their cart to see what farm it came from. Technology is enabling a world where I can go to the store, scan a gallon of milk, see that it came from the Johnson's farm in Minnesota, and decide to purchase it because the Johnson family has an Instagram page and they look really nice. Again, this might sound crazy, but it's our approaching reality. Technology is making it possible, and ever increasingly demanding consumers want that. They want that control. They want that extra visibility. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of companies trying to enhance the traceability of some aspect of the agriculture and food supply chain with technologies like blockchain. And there have been hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars invested in these areas. And now, so regardless of what intermediaries you sell through, regardless of how much of a commodity your product is, if consumers can identify you as an original source of that product, as an original grower, a producer, then how you represent yourself matters. At the end of the day, what I really want to talk to you all about is essentially thinking of your farm as your brand. Understanding consumer trends and being able to communicate with those consumers, it could very possibly end up being the differentiating factor between you and the farm down the street or you and the farm in the next state over. The difference between selling a commodity product and having a brand is the difference between selling generic acetaminophen and Tylenol. Both bottles are filled with essentially the same thing. And study after study will show you that the experts, the doctors and the nurses of the world are far less likely to have name brand products like Tylenol and Advil in their homes because they understand this reality. But the majority of the population is still willing to pay extra money for Tylenol because of the trust and the relationship we have with the brand. So with the rest of my time, I want to talk to you all about three categories of things that I think all farmers really not just should, but really have to start thinking about and paying attention to. First, understanding the ecosystem in which your eventual customers, your end consumers, the ecosystem in which they're getting information and making decisions. Secondly, I want to talk about identifying the priorities and the concerns of that audience and being able to speak to it. And lastly, how do you tailor your message to that audience so that it's heard, so that it's receptive, so that it cuts through the clutter of all the messages your audience is hearing? So let's start with this idea of understanding the ecosystem. Understanding consumers starts with understanding where they get their information, where they ask their questions, how they get influenced. And you have to come to grips with the fact that modern consumers are no longer asking the people that we traditionally consider experts. I already showed that they're turning to reality stars for diets instead of their doctor or their dietitian, and they're not asking their local butcher for advice on cuts of meat anymore. Instead, they're turning to trusted YouTube channels like this one. This is Binging with Babish. He makes some of the most beautiful and useful food videos on YouTube. Definitely recommend it. Check it out. It's 4K. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff and really highly educational. And this is where consumers turn to decide what to eat and how to cook, which means it's where they turn to decide what to buy when they make it to the grocery store, which is ultimately what we all need to care about. This influences what retailers need to buy from suppliers and what suppliers demand from producers and growers like all of you. So when a channel like this one changes its perspective, let's say they switch to only showing plant-based recipes, or they start recommending only cage-free eggs, or just really start pushing pork products instead of beef products. Suddenly, there's this ripple effect that can actually influence farmers and ranchers across this country. And that might sound hyperbolic considering it's just one guy on one YouTube channel. In fact, this guy isn't even one of the 1,000 most popular channels. I put the numbers here on the side. On YouTube, in terms of views, he's the 2,464th most viewed channel on YouTube. But if you think that means he has small reach, if you think that means he has small impact and can't have the type of influence that would actually impact farmers, then you need to pay more attention to YouTube. Because as the 2,464th most viewed channel on YouTube, he gets around 67 million views per month. 67 million views per month. That's nearly 1 billion views a year. If you don't think he and the hundreds of other food channels on YouTube can move the needle on our nation's food consumption habits, on the diets we follow, the ways we cook, the things we buy, you're crazy. So if you in any way are connected to the food system, these are the types of things you need to pay attention to. So take some time to browse around YouTube, look at food videos, look at farm videos, find the content that's influencing your customers, find the ways that people are talking about the products you create and you sell, whether you're selling to your intermediaries or to end customers, figure out what they care about, what they're watching, what they're thinking. Or hop onto a free website like this one. This is Social Blade. So it's socialblade.com. It is a free tool that I love. Social Blade organizes a lot of this information for you. It can help you better understand what's trending, how much reach different voices have on different social platforms. And it can even help you identify top influencers, top voices by category, like, for example, the food category. Having an understanding of these influential voices will better equip you to have conversations with your customers. And of course, it's not just YouTube, right? And it's not just these big major influencers with billions of viewers who are impacting consumer buying decisions. Social media is a massive part of the ecosystem in which your customers get informed. It's the place they go to ask questions, where they make decisions, where they see what their peers are thinking. Start thinking of these social platforms as opportunities to understand what your consumers are talking about. And also as an opportunity to start establishing your own digital footprint, to build your own brand. Make a Facebook page, make an Instagram page for your farm. It's free. It takes 10 minutes to get started. Start to identify what your perspective is. Start to find your voice. That's how you start to build a brand and a relationship with your customers. This is a Facebook page called TDF Honest Farming. It was created by a guy named Derek Josie, who I had the pleasure of meeting at a dairy conference down in New Orleans last year. Derek is a dairy farmer from Washington, and he started a Facebook page a few years ago for his farm, mostly as he tells the story, because he was just getting frustrated with what he considered to be misinformation about agriculture. He'd see messages from activists that he disagreed with, and he wanted to tell his side of the story. Today, Derek's page is followed by over 400,000 people on Facebook. His Facebook page is now a profitable business on its own. He paid attention to what consumers were saying. He listened. He heard what they wanted to talk about. He identified what his voice was, what his perspective was, and he got involved in the conversation. And again, I've talked to Derek about this. Never in his wildest dreams did he think he would have 400,000 people following him on Facebook. But he dove in, he got started, he tried, and it led him to this point. Any farmer, any business can do what he did. And to some extent, you should do this. You should take those first easy, simple steps. The last thing I'll say about the ecosystem is that in our modern sort of digital first world, where people are getting information from YouTube channels and from social media, less and less people are making their actual decisions at the point of purchase. Procter & Gamble used to have this term called the first moment of truth to describe the 5 seconds or so that it takes the average person when they're staring at the products on a shelf to decide what to buy. Now, with the way people can research online, with the way they can ask questions and get information, most of this is happening pre-point of purchase. It's happening before we get to the shelves. And many of those moments are now happening on Google. And for most of us, this probably seems obvious, right? The idea that searches online are incredibly important in the path to purchase. And we've all been using Google for 2 decades now. But it's important to remember that even platforms like Google are still evolving and they're ever changing each and every day. When many of us first started using Google, it looked like this. This was Google's homepage in 1998, the first ever Google homepage. Really not that long ago. It's just 22 years. It looks a little different back then, right? And take note of this little blurb here under the search bar where it says the index contains 25 million pages, soon to be much bigger. And boy, were they right. Google no longer releases data on the exact number of pages in the index. But I found some info from 2016. And in 2016, the Google index had gone from 25 million pages to 130 trillion pages. That's trillion with a T, 130 trillion pages. That's roughly 20,000 unique web pages for every person on the planet. So it's important to understand that consumers have basically limitless options to get their questions answered and get their issues addressed. And this creates 2 huge opportunities for us as farmers, or really for anyone in the business world. It allows us to analyze that search data to find patterns and trends in what consumers want. And it allows us to be among those 130 trillion voices trying to answer customer questions. Because if one thing is certain with 130 trillion pages in the index, it's that if your future customers have questions about agriculture, about health, about food, about what it is you all do for a living, they are going to get those questions answered. The question is really just who's going to be answering it. And I'll talk more about searches as we transition to sort of talking about our next bucket here, which is identifying the priorities and concerns of your potential customers. Now, I've showed this slide already, but just as a reminder, there are so many different things our customers care about, right? There's millions of these unique ideas. And as our Luke Garmin video showed us, they might have a different priority or a different concern from week to week or month to month or even from day to day. And one of the best ways to monitor customer sort of sentiment, customer priorities, is to understand the way they search, the way they use platforms like Google. And there really are a lot of ways to collect data on customers. You can do surveys or focus groups or read research that's already out there on the internet, and it's all great and it's all useful. But it's often said that Google searches is one of the most accurate sources of data because you will never be as honest with anyone in your life as you will be with the Google search bar. There's this popular business book, it's called Everybody Lies, and they go a step further on this idea. They measure the most common phrases that wives use to describe their husbands. First, they do it on social media, where wives commonly say their husbands are amazing, my best friend, and the greatest, which is so nice and warm and fuzzy. But interestingly enough, it looks a little different on Google search when no one can see what you're saying or that you're saying it. And it's nice to know, I'll tell you right up front, that amazing still makes the cut. Amazing is still one of the top 3 ways wives describe their husbands. But number 2 and 3, a jerk and annoying. You will never be as honest with anyone in your life as you will be with the Google search bar. And there is a tool called Google Trends, a free tool, google.com/trends, that allows anyone to get a little insight into how consumers are searching. It is a fascinating, useful, and honestly, it's kind of a fun tool. So again, you go to google.com/trends, you can type in 1, 2, 3, up to 5 terms at a time. You select a date range, and you get a quick, simple visualization of consumer interest over time. You can use Google Trends to understand the popularity of various products, trends in health, in diets, in cooking styles, even the types of agriculture issues that activists are focusing on, whether that might be sustainability or animal rights or GMOs. You can look for differences in priorities and interest based on geography as well, as you can see here. You can do it at the country level, the state level, or even drill down to individual cities and understand how are people thinking and talking and what are their priorities in your local market, in the area in which you sell your product, in the area in which you grow your product. And when you find something that consumers care about, something that is trending, let's say, something that is interesting right now, and if you can speak to that topic, that issue, that moment, it is a huge opportunity to start building a brand, to start building sort of a positive equity in the minds of your consumers, to start connecting with those consumers. So I'll give you an example. I've worked with some dairy organizations in the past, and through Google Trends, I noticed a sort of an interesting anomaly back in December of 2018. I did a Google Trends search for the word milk, just simple as the word milk, just one term. And then I scrolled down to this page, this section of the Google Trends report. It's a section called Related Queries, and it can show you the people who are searching for your term, in this case, milk. What are the other things that they're also searching for? And I found there was this breakout term, which is a fast rising term, fast growing term, of people searching for milk and Pepsi, which I had never heard of. I do not know what that is. To me, that sounds gross. So I did a little more research. I threw some more terms into Google Trends, and I found this graph. And I realized that there were more people searching for Pepsi milk during a 2-week period in December than there were people searching for Diet Pepsi, which again, to me was really strange and something I needed to better understand. So I did some more research. And I found out this spike corresponded with the death of actress Penny Marshall, whose character in the TV show Laverne and Shirley used to drink Pepsi mixed with milk. So now suddenly the internet decides to honor Penny Marshall by talking about Pepsi milk, by drinking Pepsi milk, by sharing recipes for Pepsi milk. Now at the time, I worked on behalf of some very large dairy associations with 8-figure advertising budgets, and none of them, and that includes me, caught this trend in real time. We found out about it after the fact. But when we're talking about consumers who lose interest in things so frequently, so quickly, catching their attention in real time is super important. Paying attention to data like this that can give you real-time insights into your consumers' priorities and concerns, it is so valuable. And I'll give you an example of why. So this is a YouTube channel from another creator called Badlands Chugs. It's where a former professional eater chugs large amounts of different liquids. Yes, the internet is a very weird place. And this guy is a total goofball, as you'll see in a second. But unlike all the well-organized, well-funded dairy groups I worked with at the time, unlike me, who worked at Google with all sorts of resources available, Badlands was paying really close attention to internet trends. And in real time, he saw what was happening with Pepsi milk. So the day that trend was spiking, he published a Pepsi milk chug video. He even captioned it, "R.I.P. Penny Marshall, this chug's for you," because I'm sure that's how Penny Marshall would want to be remembered, by this gigantic man chugging Pepsi milk, but that's besides the point. Badlands' 3 videos prior to the Pepsi milk one averaged around 200,000 views, which is already crazy and speaks to how weird the internet is. But this one got 2 million views. And I know what you're thinking. Steve, I sure hope you were going to show us the video of this giant man chugging Pepsi milk, because I can't possibly fathom how that is a YouTube channel. Well, don't worry, I am going to show you a clip. So this is a small clip from his Pepsi chug video. This is the part of the video where Badlands loses the cap for the bottle he's using.
Now the only bad thing about it is I threw the top away. But have some, well, I can mix it up this way. That wasn't smart. Oh my goodness gracious.
So yes, that video is funny and it's enjoyable to watch, but it's also worth noting that it looks like it probably cost about $6 to make, and that it probably took him about 5 minutes to plan, write, and film it. This is something anyone could do, and it got 2 million views. It got 10 times as many views as his most recent past videos. Anyone watching me talk right now could take out their phone and film a video of this quality. And if you pick a topic that people are interested in, something that's a priority to your audience, if you're timely, it'll find an audience, and often a larger one than you might expect. Now, when you're talking to customers in any format, it's important to know their interests, but it's also their concerns, right? And we can't ignore that a large number of Americans simply do not trust the food system, and they don't trust big agriculture. And while some voices in the agriculture space, like TDF Honest Farming, have found success in arguing some of these points, in trying to educate, trying to convince, it's often an easier tactic to identify areas where you agree with your customers, where you can validate their concerns. Find things they don't like about ag, or things they don't like about food, and actually reaffirm their doubts and skepticism and frustration, especially if you are going to start down this path of starting to build a brand, starting to establish your voice. Start positive, start affirmationally. And I'll give you a couple examples of that from the advertising world. The first example is from Hulu, who you're probably all familiar with as sort of a TV streaming platform or a Netflix competitor. So Hulu wanted to watch, this a couple years ago, a live sports package. And they knew from the data, and you can see some of that data here, that clearly consumers are skeptical about advertising, especially when advertising tries to include endorsements from athletes. So that was the skepticism. That was the concern Hulu identified. And instead of trying to convince people, no, you're wrong, we are being honest, and this athlete really does care about this product, they leaned into it. They decided to affirm the doubts their consumers had. They told consumers, you're right, this is valid. And they came up with a really good ad that looks like this, which I'll show you now.
Yo, thank you. Joel, Hulu has live sports MB? I thought your nickname was The Process.
Not anymore.
All right.
Do you think you could sign this without the Hulu as live sports?
Legally, nah.
Nah?
Nah.
That's kind of weird.
Mr. Embiid, why'd you change your nickname?
Money. Hulu has live sports. Hulu has live sports.
So again, a fun ad there from Hulu that I really like. But again, it just sort of reflects that idea that sometimes it's okay to tell your customers they're right. Sometimes it's okay to even make fun of yourself. Again, especially when you're first starting out trying to connect with people. And I'll give you one more example from a company sort of in the dairy space called Organic Valley. They wanted to start marketing a new breakfast drink to women. But they knew, again, from the data they had available, from the research they did, that women are traditionally highly skeptical of advertising that includes female that includes women in the advertisement, primarily because they don't like the way women are portrayed in ads. And the studies have shown that they find female representation as often either pandering or unrealistic. So Organic Balance decided, let's validate the concerns of these people. Let's validate their frustrations. Let's show them that we're on their side, that we understand. And here's one of my favorite ads of all time that they came up with to market their new product.
Like most women in commercials, I love to start each day doing yoga in my underwear.
Or journaling in my journaling nook.
And eating a wholesome, farm-fresh breakfast with a tiny spoon that I bought from a company that gives tiny spoons to underprivileged children.
Huh. According to science, most professional women don't have time for any of that.
Not that we need research to prove it, but there's research to prove it.
57% of us are up before the sun is up.
21% of us check our work email before even getting out of bed.
What?
Let's go get that morning meeting.
9% of women cite dry shampoo as one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century.
I'm done.
33% of us never make our bed. Like, ever.
21% of us have used an article of clothing to camouflage a stain. Very nice.
Only 16% of women would describe their morning with the hashtag blessed. And that seems kind of high.
58% of women will swear at someone or something this morning. Oh,
You know what 100% of us do have time for?
A real-life Pinterest board? Fermenting your own small batch kombucha?
Crocos? No, an organic breakfast in a bottle.
That's why we created Organic Balance.
Cropos.
A nutritious organic breakfast with 16 grams of protein and half the day's calcium, so you can seize the cray. Find out what real women's mornings are really like at realmorningreport.com.
So that's one of my favorite ads of all time. And again, speaks to that idea of getting on the same side of a belief or an argument or a concern that your customers have. And like I said, my wife is a farmer, and I totally understand the frustration that many in the ag industry feel as misinformation spreads. But pick your battles. When you're first trying to connect with people, first trying to establish a voice and a brand, try focusing on conversations where you can be on the same side of the argument as your potential customer. Which leads to well into my next point, my final point or category of points, I guess, which is to tailor your message. Because modern consumers demand so many things from us in the food industry. We've gotten in the bad habit of overselling ourselves. We walk through grocery aisles and it feels like every product has 10 big flashy call outs saying all the great things it does. It's really important to remember that modern consumers are so inundated with messaging that simply adding more attributes is a terrible way to cut through the noise. The most successful communicators are picking their best differentiator or the thing that matters most to their customers. And instead of trying to be 50 things, they try to very clearly and loudly be one thing, but to make it that one thing that matters. I'll give you an example. This is Halo Top ice cream. It launched back in 2012 with the intent of being more or less a healthier ice cream option. And you can see from their packaging, it was relatively simple. They didn't have too many call outs or too many claims they were making. They basically wanted consumers to focus on three things: protein, calories, and net carbs per serving. By 2015, they were doing 1.4 million in sales, and they did some research and realized that even this strategy, even just trying to be three things, wasn't a perfect fit for their customers. They realized that the priority of their shoppers was calories and not per serving, per container. No one wants to measure servings of ice cream, right? I think we can all relate to that. So they said, we're going to stop being three things. And now that we understand the most important priority, we can tailor our messaging. We can tailor our packaging to that one thing that matters. So heading into 2016, they changed their packaging. And it still mentions protein down here in the corner. And it's got a back panel with all the other information and carbs, et cetera, et cetera. But they clearly said, we are all about this idea of calories per pint. We're loudly going to be this one thing that we think matters most. In 2015, they did 1.4 million in sales. Then they changed their packaging. The next year, they did 44 million, and the following year, they did 350 million. As you all hopefully take steps to talk more about yourselves, your products, and your farms as you aim to build a brand. Don't feel like you need to be all things to all people. Figure out what makes you, your business, your family, your land special, and tell that story and just that story so that you can truly tell it well. And I'll wrap this up with one last idea and two last videos here that are hopefully fun ones around this concept of tailoring your message. You all are in an industry that has grown increasingly complex. Health and wellness is complicated. Sustainability, animal welfare are complicated. Agriculture in general is complicated. There's so much science and data and research to be shared. But if you do make a social media account, if you do make a website, if you do decide to rethink the way you talk to your buyers and to your end consumers, remember that it is very hard to get your foot in the door with complicated, dense information, especially in modern society where we're surrounded by messages. If you were at a party and walked up to a group of strangers and you've been working on your PhD in your doctoral thesis in applied mathematics, but also last week you met Beyonce at a coffee shop, you would not lead with a story about your thesis. You always lead with your Beyonce story. Start by trying to win people's attention, to win their interest before you try to convince them of anything, before you try to sell them anything. So I want to show you a video from a PR and sort of advertising campaign that came out of the Melbourne Metro Authority. This is a government organization in Australia who was tasked with reducing serious injuries and deaths from accidents involving trains. An incredibly serious topic. And believe me, they have all sorts of scary data and science and procedures you need to follow. But they knew that first they needed to get attention before they could educate. So they started with this campaign, which was their Beyonce story. It was a campaign called Dumb Ways to Die. And I'll show you a little bit from their video.
Get your toast out with a fork. Do your own electrical work. Teach yourself how to fly. Eat a 2-week-old unrefrigerated pie. Dumb ways to die. So many dumb ways to die. Dumb ways to die. So many dumb ways to die.
So I'll stop it there, although I'd love to show you the whole video. Check it out sometime. It's quite funny and will very definitely get stuck in your head. So it goes on to have dozens of other ways to die, including several involving train accidents and getting hit by trains. It was funny, it was silly, it was goofy, it was different, and it was amazingly successful. Here's some stats to back up my claims of how successful it was. The mobile game has gotten over 200 million downloads. That's right, they turned it into a mobile game. The song has charted in 3 different countries. The YouTube video has 185 million views, and they've reduced accidents around trains by 30%. So what does a Beyonce story look like in agriculture? Or I guess let me just add before I even move on. Of course, the Melbourne Metro Authority has the data. They have the science. It's all here on their website. But they started with their Beyonce story. So what does a Beyonce story look like in agriculture? What does it look like for you as a farmer? It could be anything. Many farmers have been successful talking about their families, showing their passion for the animals on their farm or their deep connection with the land. Some have found success, like Dumb Ways to Die, by just being different, by being funny or weird. And I'll show you one last clip. It is from a group called the Peterson Farm Bros. It is 3 brothers who decided to make a YouTube channel about their farm, which largely consists of song parodies they made about farming. And this last one is a popular parody they have of the song Gangnam Style, which they, of course, called Farmer Style.
Working farmer style. Farmer style. We are the Peterson Farm Bros, and we're farming and we grow it. We love agriculture and we want the world to know it. Farming is a way of life with many different flavors, being stewards of the gifts God gave us. Out here on the farm,
we're running green John Deere tractor.
Out here on the farm,
we work in many weather factors.
Out here on the farm,
we're working hard to raise your food.
Out here on the farm, on the family farm. culture is so important to me and should be to you. Hey! The world and will never end.
And that video goes on and on. I just like to play it up to the point where they yell, hey, because I always thought that was funny. There are so many different ways to connect with people, to build that relationship, to start that brand. The Peterson Farm Bros did it this way. It might not be the way you do it, but there's a lot of ways to connect with people. So just to kind of, I guess, sum up what we talked about here today, we started with these 3 ideas, right? The idea of understanding the ecosystem, of identifying priorities and concerns, and of tailoring your messaging. But to simplify that all down, really everything we talked about comes to these 3 simple ideas, which is that you need to accept that the supply chain is changing and that no one knows what the future will hold. So you have to put yourself in the best possible position to survive any changes. And the best way to prepare is to get better at understanding consumers and following the trends, and starting to play around with a tool like Google Trends, which again is free, is an awesome way to get started. And from there, it's just about establishing your identity for yourself and for your farm, for your business. Thinking of your farm as not just a business, but as a brand. And starting a Facebook page, an Instagram page, is a painless, easy way to start finding your voice. So thank you all so much for taking the time today. I hope it was helpful, and I hope it was different. So please feel free to submit your questions, and I'll do the best I can to answer them all. But also feel free to reach out to me anytime directly through my website or email or LinkedIn. I miss the world in which I got to travel around and do these speeches in person and meet people like all of you. So I'm always happy to chat. And again, thank you very much for the time, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Steve, thank you so much. Fascinating. By the way, don't forget to use the Submit a Question box to ask Steve any question. FCS Financial will follow up with Steve to make sure all those questions are answered. Now, here's something for you. Are you missing the meeting venue or ballroom experience, right? Because in this virtual world, it's so different. I know I am. So here is a great way to recreate that in the comfort of your own home. First thing you do is go over to the thermostat in your room, wherever you are right now, and pump it up to a really, really high temperature. Make it so hot it's unbearable in there. And then 10 minutes later, take it down to the minimum, and you're absolutely freezing, right? Just like a meeting venue. Oh, the other thing you can do is go and get the rest of the seats and chairs in your home and bring them really close to you on either side of you to get that kind of claustrophobic squished in effect. Once again, recreating the meeting venue experience in your own home. All right, after all of the content so far, it's probably time for a quick break, an opportunity to get up, stretch your legs, check everyone in the family is suitably occupied. Oh, and then meet us back here in exactly 10 minutes. Welcome back from the break. I hope you made the most of every single minute. Earlier, we heard about consumer trends and thinking from Steve Lurch. Now, though, it's time to shift gears and talk agriculture supply and demand trends with Mike Pearson. Before Mike begins, I've got a few reminders. First of all, don't forget to return tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. prompt. Check out the download section to find a list of upcoming events and deadlines. Talking of which, the FCS Financial Scholarship deadline is March the 1st. Now, since its inception, more than $671,000 and more than 567 scholarships have been awarded to children and grandchildren of member owners. More information about the scholarship can be found on our website at myfcsfinancial.com. All right, now let's move on to Mike Pearson. Mike is a former farmer, former banker, and co-host of the podcast AG News Daily, with over 10,000 listeners a month. For over 5 years, he was host of the nationally syndicated Market to Market TV program. He currently serves as the Vice President of Market Engagement for the Zana Group, a commodities trading brokerage firm. His presentation today includes an update and outlook for the farm markets and the global trends impacting those markets. So get ready to learn and laugh with Mike Pearson.
Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. It is a pleasure to be with everybody, even if with isn't quite in person. It's great to be here virtually. Great to share what's going on in the world of agriculture. My name is Mike Pearson. I currently am the co-host of This Week in Agribusiness. You can find me along with Max Armstrong and Orion Samuelson on the RFD TV channel on cable or on hundreds of local stations around the country. So do be sure to tune in. We like to keep folks up to date on what is happening in our industry. And when we think about what's happening in our industry, we have not gotten a break from headlines in 2020. When we look at the things that agriculture has dealt with, some positive, some negative, this year is certainly one for the record books. For my conversation today, I want to talk specifically about supply and demand. And I want to talk specifically about how supply and demand, how those outlooks have shifted over the past 6 months. Quick note, quick word of warning, I am recording early. We're getting this done so we can have everything edited, presented in a professional package for you, but that means I am recording on December 17th. Now, between now and December 17th, we do not have any major governmental reports scheduled, so all of that data will be the same. But a lot can happen politically. Of course, we are in a transition period as we watch the Biden administration slowly replace the Trump administration, and global trade can change quickly. So with those two caveats, things could certainly change by the time you view this program. I do think when we take a look at the major factors that are influencing both the supply of row crops and the demand for them going forward, I think you're going to have a pretty good view of what to expect as we look out to 2021. Now, for today, I am going to be focusing most of my energy on the row crops. I don't mean to leave out livestock. The reason I'm not covering livestock is because we're talking supply and demand. And as we look out to 2021, potentially into 2022, I think there's really only one factor that will be changing supply and demand issues apparent in the livestock market, and that's COVID. If we get a vaccine, I think demand's going to continue to grow, and we'll see folks getting back to restaurants. The livestock market looks pretty good. But every time we have an outbreak and we see folks pull back from visiting restaurants, we see folks go back to cooking cheaper meals, perhaps at home, I think we run the risk of seeing the livestock market weaken. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it today, because as we get through this next year, if the livestock markets are going to move, I believe it will be headline driven and it will be COVID related. Now, when we take a look at the row crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat, there are a confluence of factors that are working together to help make sure those stories get told and to help drive enthusiasm for those markets for investors. This is something we haven't seen in the ag industry really since 2016, 2015. When we look at both dairy and beef markets, we had a compelling bullish story. We do too, right now at the end of 2020. But in order to figure out what that story is telling us, I think we've got to go back a little bit, take a look at this past year. Let's figure out what the supply of grain looks like in the developed world. Let's see what the picture is throughout the world that really trades corn, soybeans, and wheat. And in order to get a full picture of what's going on there, we've got to take a look at what happened this past year. When we think about the headlines that moved our market, it started in January. We saw the Phase 1 China deal get signed. All of a sudden, the trade war that has really been hammering agriculture very hard for the past 18 months comes to an end, right? That's the idea. At least we're making progress or taking a stride forward. That was the thought there with Phase 1 deal. That was the topic in January. Enthusiasm, optimism. China's going to buy $40 billion worth of ag goods. Holy cow. Whew. And then we get to March, and COVID started happening. And we started to see agricultural supply chains torn asunder. We saw livestock plants. As you can see in the picture, we all remember this. I'm sure a lot of your growers are in the livestock business, whether you were beef, poultry, pork. I've heard even tilapia was having a hard time finding processing facilities this spring. This was true across the country. This was bad news. This backed up hogs. This created the first major drop in the livestock markets. And it has definitely impacted the way that those buyers of feed yards, hog producers, will be considering their grain purchases as we get into this next year. So that hit us in March. So we're taking it in stride. The industry's trying to move forward. And then look, at the bottom left of that slide, bottom right rather, we've got the drought. Dryness started developing throughout the growing season, predominantly in the western Corn Belt. It slowly creeped its way eastward, really, as you can see on the map, making its way basically to Des Moines when we're looking at the severe drought impact. And that drought was developing starting in July, working its way through August. We started to see some analysts scaling back their crop projections. And I think those have been borne out as we've worked through harvest. Then, of course, the derecho. For our friends in South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, parts of Ohio, I believe that thing even had winds stretching all the way to Pennsylvania at one point. We lost a significant number of acreage, a significant amount of acreage rather, and high production acreage. Really looking at where that derecho did the most damage, it was in the non-droughty parts of Iowa and Illinois. So we had corn that was struggling throughout the month of August due to the dryness. Then we had the corn just east of that get knocked down with this derecho. Garden spots were few and far between this year. Folks that were in them seemed to know it. I've definitely heard reports of record yields. In fact, was talking to a fellow last night whose mom and dad got a record yield on their farm in northeast Iowa. So it's not uncommon. Those folks are out there this year. But by the time we got to harvest, we saw a lot more growers struggling with their production than we'd anticipated at the top of the year. And that difference, the difference between reality and expectations, that's what makes the market, right? And so that's why we're seeing this enthusiasm and these rallies taking place as we roll out the end of the 2020 year. Now, just what kind of rally can we expect? Well, a good way to judge what could be coming forward is through the stocks to use ratio. This is, to my mind, the most succinct explanation of how much corn do we produce, how much do we consume, what's the difference? Because at the end of the day, the size of that difference makes the difference on pricing. If we have a lot of grain, let's look back at the 80s. When we think of crises that developed in 80s, in agriculture, the 80s are the prime example. And look at that stocks to use ratio. We were sitting on tremendous amounts of grain. Now, when we think back to just 2 or 3 years ago, coming out of 2013, 2014, 2015, the long tail of the drought has come to an end. We have seen acres expand. We saw the grower move to meet the market's demand, right? And prices come back down. At that point, we also really started to see ending stocks creep upwards. This was the trend that was solidly in place. 18 and 19 were exceptions. 19, we saw a pretty big drop in national average yield. 20, we were expected to turn that around. We were looking at a 2 billion plus bushel carryout. Supply was going to be enormous. And that was true up until COVID happened. And then we saw ethanol production fall apart. Now the supply was going to be huge, and we didn't have the demand. Well, things have turned around. Yes, the crop was still big. Yes, the yield is still fairly excellent, down from the midsummer peak. Of course, we dropped yield in the final several WASDE reports. But we also saw demand really start to increase. So that difference, that supply and demand difference, has converted us from having a huge carryout, stocks-to-use ratio north of 20%. We're expecting to see the most bearish stocks-to-use ratio since 1996, before the ethanol boom. In March, that's where the trade was expecting this corn market to go. Didn't happen. Supply tightened, demand grew, and we've seen prices rally. Now, the wild card. What comes next? Well, I'll share my thoughts here in just a second. But first, let's talk about soybeans, because we've had a very similar scenario play out in soybeans. In fact, it's even more profound than what we're seeing on the corn side. Look at that stocks-to-use ratio for 2020. This is as of the December WASDE report coming from USDA. Holy cow. You have to go back to 2012 to find anything tighter. And that's it. This is the second tightest stocks-to-use ratio heading into a new year we have seen since the catastrophic drought of 2020. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. When we think about what drives the ag markets, obviously it's all supply and demand. I'm going to quit saying that. But the real important thing is what happens when demand spikes. Demand-led rallies are far more far-reaching and impactful than supply-led rallies. And right now, December, January 2020, 2021, we don't yet know which market we're moving into. We know that supply tightened throughout 2020. It tightened domestically and it tightened globally. We'll talk about some of the global impacts here in just a bit. But we also saw demand accelerate. So, are we on the cusp of a new demand-led rally? Or are we seeing a price spike driven by a decrease, a sharp, sudden decrease in supply that will be fixed next year? Somebody is going to answer that question correctly and make $1 billion. I don't know if I'm that person. I could certainly use $1 billion, but I don't know if I'm there. But I do have some thoughts, and I have some things that I hope you can keep in mind as you're working with your producers to make their marketing plans for this next year, and that I hope you'll help your producers keep in mind as this next year gets volatile. I do believe we are going to see lots of price swings in 2021. And I think there will be lots of loud opinions for growers to take hold of. And I think it's our job as professionals working with farmers whose life and livelihood is on the line, it's our job to help them take a step away from the emotion, take a look at the big picture, and see if they can't develop a better sense of what's happening, both to shoot for the upside and to manage their risk to the downside. It is going to be a huge challenge in 2021, and I hope as we run through this presentation, you'll start to get a feel for things you can keep an eye out for to pass on to your growers. And when we look at stocks-to-use ratios, this is one of the most important things that growers should be keeping an eye on monthly. That's when they publish them. Take a look. See if things are getting tighter or if the spread is getting wider. If things are getting tighter, the odds that a rally will continue are stronger. And when we look at super tight stocks-to-use ratio, like we're seeing with soybeans right now, that's where things start to get interesting. When things get tight, when supplies get tight, end users get desperate. And we can see huge moves to the upside as folks move to fill their personal supply chain. This is a year to be alert. The supply side dynamics are the ones telling us to be alert, to get bids into your local elevator, set them as high as you want. Have folks put dream bids out there. Will they get hit? I don't know. But folks that had done that with sorghum got hit this year. When China stepped into the American market to buy sorghum, they bought all of it, and they did it in about a 2-week period. These are the kind of things that can happen when end users get desperate, and that's the scenario I believe we're entering with the hiccups in supply we saw globally throughout the year. Soybean stocks-to-use ratio definitely way down. Taking a look at the wheat stocks-to-use ratio. Okay, still elevated, but considerably lower than it was earlier this year, and considerably lower than it was expected to be when we saw growers move into the field to harvest their winter wheat or to get their spring wheat in the ground. Again, supplies have been disrupted. In wheat's case, it's dryness. This is the fundamental story impacting the market moving forward. The supply side of the market moving forward. The dryness that we're seeing, not just in the Western Plains, which is profound. And we are certainly seeing this. There's no snow cover across a lot of the Great Plains. We are expecting to see colder temperatures here eventually. It's a La Nina year. So from the meteorologist I've talked to, and I'm certainly not one, we'll talk weather in just a bit, and I just want to glance off of it. But weather is certainly a factor. And in a La Nina year, we expect to see highly variable winter precipitation and temperature. So the idea that we're going to ameliorate this drought immediately seems a little far-fetched. We've also got dryness over in the former Soviet Union. We've got dryness in the Black Sea region. All of these things are working to constrain global supply. To buy sorghum, they bought all of it, and they did it in about a 2-week period. These are the kind of things that can happen when end users get desperate, and that's the scenario I believe we're entering with the hiccups in supply we saw globally throughout the year. Soybean stocks-to-use ratio definitely way down. Taking a look at the wheat stocks-to-use ratio. Okay, still elevated, but considerably lower than it was earlier this year, and considerably lower than it was expected to be when we saw growers move into the field to harvest their winter wheat or to get their spring wheat in the ground. Again, supplies have been disrupted. In wheat's case, it's dryness. This is the fundamental story impacting the market moving forward. The supply side of the market moving forward. The dryness that we're seeing, not just in the Western Plains, which is profound. And we are certainly seeing this. There's no snow cover across a lot of the Great Plains. We are expecting to see colder temperatures here eventually. It's a La Nina year. So from the meteorologist I've talked to, and I'm certainly not one, we'll talk weather in just a bit, and I just want to glance off of it. But weather is certainly a factor. And in a La Nina year, we expect to see highly variable winter precipitation and temperature. So the idea that we're going to ameliorate this drought immediately seems a little far-fetched. We've also got dryness over in the former Soviet Union. We've got dryness in the Black Sea region. All of these things are working to constrain global supply. And just a few days ago, President Vladimir Putin announced, and again, I'm recording December 17th, that they are going to put an export tax on wheat over their export quota. So exporters right now are rushing to fill that quota. They're pushing wheat out the door in Russia as fast as they possibly can. But eventually, Russian wheat's going to get a lot higher priced. The global supply situation will tighten again. And I believe America is going to be the benefactor of that global tightening in wheat, in soybeans, and in corn. Let's take a look at what happened this past year, because the seeds of what's to come were planted in the growing season of 2020, right? And the growing season of 2020 saw two large-scale problems. Saw a lot of problems for different growers across the country, but two big problems that caught the attention of traders and caught the attention of marketers, folks that write stories about agriculture. The two stories were, left side, the drought. This was slow in coming. I guess I shouldn't say that. This drought was slow in being recognized by a lot of folks in ag media. It was just dryness. It was dryness across the western Great Plains. And then we got to the month of August, and for a lot of growers, the tap just shut off. And we saw that drought continue to expand and intensify across really the entire western portion of the country, making its way basically to Des Moines. You can see the black line there. That's the extent of the severe long-term drought. You can see it covering half of Iowa. That was in place, really got going in the month of August. And then also in the month of August, on the right side of that slide, is the derecho. I'm sure a lot of you know folks or perhaps live in these areas that were impacted. South Dakota, pretty much the bulk of Iowa, all the way across into Illinois, Indiana, parts of Ohio. The gusts even made their way to Pennsylvania. This was a huge wind event, leveled lots and lots of acres of corn. So these were the stories heading into harvest. These two supply disruptions were the last things we were thinking about from a production side, just as combines were starting to roll. We also see trouble developing down in South America. So before I get to that, I want to talk just a second about the drought monitor. There is going to be a lot of talk, and perhaps 2 weeks from now, where you're sitting, you're already hearing this talk. The drought monitor for December 2020, this most recent one I've posted, is a lot worse than the corresponding date in 2011. Basically, the drought we're in right now, we're talking Western Great Plains, is substantially worse in terms of severity and far more widespread than the dryness we were seeing December 2011, January 2012. If this dryness continues, if we don't start to see widespread precipitation events across a lot of this droughted area where they are significant inches behind their annual average, we are going to see more and more commentators comparing 2021 to 2012. If combines start rolling in, if planters start rolling in March, we are going to hear a lot of comparison to 2012. Is it justified? I think is a question we're going to get a lot this spring if it's still dry. Is it a justifiable comparison? And the answer is yes, it is. It's dry now. It was dry then. But also no. History doesn't repeat, right? It rhymes. And this is a rhyming year. We're dealing with a very, very dry, we're lacking a lot of subsoil moisture across the country, but there's a long way to go before that crop comes in. We can absolutely get a wet enough spring to replace all of this dryness and start to concern ourselves with a flood. That's entirely feasible. So I don't want to get too carried away. But I do want to recognize that there is the potential for explosive movement to the upside in all three: corn, soybeans, and wheat. This drought bears watching. If it continues spreading, I'm a lot more inclined to hold on to my production. If, however, we start to see some rainfall develop, if the jet stream makes its way through the center of the country and starts bringing, be it snow, be it ice, be it rain, moisture, then I think we need to be looking a little more closely at making some marketing decisions, because this drought will be very supportive of prices as long as it's there. As soon as it starts to go away, we're going to start to see prices slip. This market is hooked on good news, and it's looking for anything to make a correction. Could we see that correction between now when I'm recording and when you see it? Absolutely. That's a possibility. And I would not be too surprised if it has happened. We're going to see very thin trade between Christmas and New Year's. We could absolutely see some volatility, because not only from a supply side perspective are we concerned about drought in this country, we are more concerned, in fact, about the drought that's developing down in South America. Now, as of right now, they are dealing with dryness. I don't believe it has been declared a full drought as of yet. However, when you look at that circled area, that is the region of Argentina and Brazil that produces a tremendous amount of corn and soybeans. And then Brazilian production continues basically straight up the left coast or west boundary line of Brazil. That's where we get to Mato Grosso do Sul and Mato Grosso, both places that are massive producers of soybeans. The southern area of those regions are very, very dry. As of this recording, December 17th, and it's about 95% planted with their soybean crop. Argentina is expected to be about 96% planted. They're running slow. It has been very, very dry. USDA is currently expecting Brazil to produce about 133 million metric tons. That's been their projection for at least 2 months. They did not make any adjustments to it in December. However, a lot of other grain information services have started to ratchet down that Brazilian crop. We're starting to see some numbers come out at 131 million metric tons. Still a record. Brazil is growing a ton of grain this year, but less. This Brazilian crop is one that will make or break, I believe, our pricing once we get to March. As of right now, it is widely expected that this Brazilian crop will be very, very large. The Brazilians have every incentive to plant as much ground into corn and soybeans as they possibly can. Their prices have been exceptional. I've talked to a few Brazilian growers, and they say their comparisons are that 2020, 2019 were basically like the American growers 2012. If you were an American farmer who didn't get droughted out completely in 2012, that was a great year. That's what these folks in Brazil are saying this past year has been. So they have every incentive to tear up ground and get it into production. And in fact, this is what we're seeing. This deforestation in Brazil is continuing. It's really grown over the past 2 years. I expect it to continue as we go down the line. When we think grain supply, this is something we need to keep in mind. When we look at American agricultural production, when we look at the arable land in this country, the ground that we can till, we know where it all is. And it's pretty much already in production, right? Occasionally roll a few chunks into CRP and some of it comes and goes. Maybe it's a pasture one year, then we'll plant oats, we'll run it into a simple rotation, run it back to pasture. The fringe acres, so to speak, might have some change at the margin, but by and large, we know how much corn and soybeans we're going to grow from now until eternity, unless it shrinks, right? Our production grows and we shrink the area that we can plant. Brazil is in a very different boat. The boat in Brazil is a boat that can be added on to. There are currently about 300 million acres of cerrado in Brazil. Cerrado is like a savanna. Consider it the Texas Mesquite Plains. It is ground, scrub ground, grass ground that is covered in grass and in short trees and all of this. And it's fairly simple to tear that ground up and put it into production. That's what these charts are measuring. They call it deforestation, but largely soybeans and corn in Brazil aren't going into the rainforest. They are, to an extent. That's certainly happening. But largely most of this ground that is coming under the plow in Brazil is coming out of this large pasture area, this cerrado. And there's 300 million more acres of that Brazil can bring online if the prices warrant. Prices warrant it. And that's what we're seeing happen. Now, granted, you can look back 15 years, we see massive amounts of deforestation. That has stabilized. Brazil has cut way back. They've got laws in place to reduce the amount of forest ground that can be taken. You tear up 10 acres, you plant 10 acres to forest, blah, blah, blah. They've got all sorts of things that have slowed it down. But anytime there's an economic incentive to do something, even if it means breaking a law, if the incentive is strong enough, it will happen. I don't want to be caught as a bank robber, right? Punishments are pretty severe. But if the bank vault is big enough, I'll take that risk. That's what a lot of frontier farmers in Brazil are dealing with. And when they look at the prices being paid for soybeans in particular, and corn as we get through 2021 to a lesser extent, they have every incentive to get out there and put more ground under the plow, and that's something that will continue. The administration of current President Jair Bolsonaro is much less concerned about the environment than some of his predecessors and is pretty in support of folks doing what they need to do to make a living, I think is a way to put it. So I don't see a whole lot of brakes being put on the Brazilian agricultural expansion while he's in office. I could be mistaken, but as we look ahead, I think American growers need to plan for more and more fierce competition coming out of Brazil. Those folks have seen a rally now. They've tasted really great prices, and they love it. They're a lot like American growers in 2013 and 14. Their expansion mode will be on high. That's something to keep an eye on. And it's something that is needed. This growth in Brazil, it is needed. This is something we've been talking about for a long time. Global populations continue to increase, blah, blah, blah. That's all great. And this comes back to something I have said a lot in previous talks. So if you've heard this before, I apologize. we don't make any money feeding the world in agriculture. We make our money feeding people who can afford to buy what we're selling. And the trend that we've seen, and 2020 has been the hiccup, but the trend that we've seen is a world growing richer. 2020 has thrown that for a loop, but there's an important caveat I will cover at the very end. But largely, when we think of what is needed, we are going to need more production. And the Brazilians are going to be the ones who can respond to that production the most quickly. Anytime we see a price spike, we should, from now until they tear up that 300 millionth acre on the Cerrado, we should expect to see Brazilian acres growing. The trade war, I believe, was detrimental for American growers in this sense. It increased China's reliance on Brazil. Brazilian growers got big money. Now they're in that same growth mindset that American growers were in post-drought of 2012. I think that's going to create some headaches for us long-term. 2020 and 2021, I'm not terribly worried because of the dryness. So I think we've got some opportunities to look forward when we're taking a stock of weather down in Brazil. The other major production issue that we have to take note of in 2020 is in China. This is the floods in China. Now, this summer, domestically, we had a whole lot filling our television sets, filling our cable news channels. We had a ton of information coming at us, right? We had COVID in full swing. We had the meat issues that were impacting our country. We had folks not getting toilet paper. A lot of things were on our mind. And for a lot of Americans, we didn't notice what was happening in southeastern China. Basically, from the Yangtze River, which is that blue line on this slide, and south, they saw floods they have not seen for centuries. They saw floods this year they haven't seen for a millennia. Massive amounts of rainfall all through that area of China, which coincidentally is where the vast majority of Chinese crops are grown, particularly their food crops. Corn, wheat, and rice are grown in that region. Now, over the past 70 years now, China has made a concerted effort to be self-sufficient in its three food crops, rice, corn, and wheat. Those are the areas they have devoted a lot of scientific research. They've invested a lot in plant breeding to make these crops perform well in China. Their recent purchase of Syngenta might be another sort of block in the wall as they try to grow their self-sufficiency on food crops. That's where they've really spent their money. You look at soybeans, their yields have been growing, but at a much more slow rate. The Chinese have been very, very happy just buying soybeans on the international market and making sure they can feed their people with their domestic supplies. It is very important to the Chinese government that they are able to feed their people domestically. They do not want to be importing food crops unless they absolutely have to. Well, let's look at what's happened in 2020 in China. This is where the demand picture meets with the supply picture, really for the first time. So we don't have a good handle on the amount of corn that China grows. We've got numbers from China, and we've got numbers from respected private analysts. But at the end of the day, they're still private analyst estimates. We don't have a hard and fast number. There is no USDA that's trusted like the USDA is trusted in China. But we do know that they would not be coming onto the international market unless they had to. Look at what they've purchased over this past year. They have been buying corn aggressively. And when we think about China's average corn yield, to come up with this kind of tonnage, the kind of tonnage they have bought over the past year, they had to lose a lot of ground to these floods. And all of you know, or all of you have growers who know what it's like to rebuild after a once in a 10,000 year flood. It's a struggle. And it's a struggle for growers in this country with four-wheel drive tractors, track tractors, with infrastructure. We still struggle to get production back the next year. Now imagine if you're dealing with a 10,000 year flood and you're a couple, a husband and wife who farm together on 6 hectares, and you've got an oxen and you've got to get that ground fit. Is it going to be ready in the spring? My gut says no. I don't think it will be. I think China's demand for corn in 2021 is going to be very similar to its demand for corn in 2020. I fully expect to see this kind of purchase continue as China makes its way through this next year. I do think they will be devoting a lot of internal money to rebuilding their fields. I don't think China will fall asleep on the switch at this. I think they are going to be moving as much dirt as they possibly can to get these growers back in business. But it's not going to happen overnight. And in the interim, they're going to need grain, and the U.S. is kind of the only place they can come until that second crop corn comes out of Brazil much later this year. So we've got a good 6 months here of being the driver in the corn market when we're looking at demand. We've also got another 4 months to be the driver when we look at demand as it concerns soybeans. Taking a look at what's happening, I want to jump back over to China for just a hot second, because this is where the enthusiasm is coming from. This is where the bull story has developed. When we think back to the start of this year, let's go back in our Wayback Machines, go to February 2020, all the way back in the before times. Remember that? You could go to a restaurant, stand up and have a beer. It was a crazy time. Also, it was a time when we thought about pandemic viruses and China, we weren't yet thinking about COVID. We were thinking about African swine fever. The African swine fever epidemic is one that the American hog industry has been watching for a long time. This was our opening to really push down the door and sell mountains of pork into China. Well, COVID put a crimp on it. We're shipping a lot of pork. I mean, at the end of the day, it's worked out largely the way we'd expected. China needs protein. They're buying it aggressively from everyone around the world, and they're rebuilding their domestic industry. So this is where I want to spend a little bit of time as we look at the demand picture going forward. As China rebuilds their hog herds, which they're doing, as you take a look at that chart, this was from a little bit earlier in the year. This was their target for December hadn't yet been hit. So this was just looking forward. We saw their hog numbers decline over the past 2.5 years. About a year ago, they decided that since their numbers were shrinking and that was driving pork prices up, they're just not going to tell us their numbers are shrinking. And so we see a very Chinese government move, which is they just stop releasing the information. We could see it there in October of 2019. They just quit telling us. We have had a few surveys since. You can see those increases. That's from the Statistics Bureau, a branch of the government of China. So take it for what it's worth. But it does appear to be the hog herd is coming back. Now, one of the most profound shifts from African swine fever in China is the move away from smallholder farmers raising hogs to massive hog operations. This is a shift that has been going on since about 2009. The Chinese government made a decision that they were going to pursue a more modern way of raising hogs. The challenge facing the Chinese government was, how do you get the small-time farmers out of the pig business? In rural China, hogs are viewed very similar to the way hogs were viewed in the 1920s, 30s, 40s in America. They're the mortgage lifters. You don't need a whole lot of ground. You're feeding them table scraps. Your costs are nothing, and you're selling the piglets. It's been a good business for a lot of Chinese peasants who are making the best of their land. Well, the government wants them out. They want to consolidate the industry. They want a more uniform product. They are really looking at the system that was developed in the United States, and that's their goal. So African swine fever did the Chinese government a big favor. African swine fever is a lot more likely to sweep through a neighborhood of backyard hog producers. They're living in the open. They've got a lot of exposure to various viruses, to wildlife, and they were the folks that were hardest hit. So when we look at this chart from about January 2018, which is where it starts, through, call it January 2020, we saw a consistent decline in the number of hogs produced in China. But what we were also seeing is that production was moving from a lot of hogs being raised inefficiently in the countryside to fewer hogs being raised scientifically in a city, well, so to speak. Look at this picture. This was very recent, about a week ago my time, so mid-December. This picture went public. This is a sow farm and finishing operation in China. It is designed to hold 89 million sows. It will produce 2.1 million hogs per year. Now that appears to be a massive biosecurity landmine waiting to happen. However, the Chinese say that they believe they can control access in such a way that they can minimize virus impact. You can't do that out in the countryside with your open lot pork. This is where the country is moving their hog production. As they do this, they are moving to a scientific ration. They are moving to a consistent ration, a blended ration that really takes advantage of all of the protein available in soybeans and bean meal. So this is where we're going to see continued demand for bean meal, even if the Chinese hog herd continues to decline. The hogs that are left are eating better, and they're eating our stuff. This is really good news. And this is something we're seeing develop this year. When we take a look at what's happening on the export page, we are setting a record in 2020, 2021. This is an incredible year for exports, most of them going to China. This is where they have really stepped up. They have already purchased all of Brazil's inventory, so there's really only one game in town, and they're playing the game. China has been making lots of purchase commitments, and to their credit, they have been taking lots of shipments. But it's China. When we see exports at this level, when we see prices getting toppy, that's when we start to see China make some cancellations. So I do want folks to be aware that we will absolutely see setbacks over this next year. If China moves in and makes a big cancellation, I don't put it past them one bit. I don't know when it would come, right? I don't know where their pain point is internally to say, oh, we're going to cancel this one and repurchase later. We know they're probably going to do that. And when they do that, we will see a correction. Prices will move back down. But demand is very strong. And that demand is certain. If China's going to game the system, they're going to try to game it for a dollar advantage, not to actually get out of any contracts, because they're going to need the beans. The wild card is Brazil. If Brazilian weather changes and that supply grows massively, we could see China take their business down there. Looking over at corn, it's a very similar story on the world stage. Look at those exports, record large for the modern era. That's coming into a year we were expected to see tremendous carryout, compounded by an absolute, effectively shutdowning of the ethanol industry. And yet, corn exports continue to climb. Now, a lot of these are going to China, and a lot of these are going to Mexico. Both those countries in the past 6 months have set a new top 10 record for one-day export sales. They need the grain. We've talked about it with China. Mexico, it's a very similar situation. They were drier longer, and they just always buy corn from us. And so they're making their moves. They're getting it secured before prices start to rally. So now, again, the wild card, who's going to cancel and when? It's always the risk with exports. It's not like ethanol, where once you get it rolling and build it up, it kind of self-perpetuates. Exports, they can turn the page or turn the switch off and on. One of the reasons the export switch has been on so aggressively in 2020 is right here. This is the value of the US dollar. We're going back a year. We see that big spike coming into, this was right around when COVID first hit. We started to see the dollar really, really rise. And then the government started to address COVID. Right? We started to print more money. We had a $3 trillion stimulus package. All of those things pushed more dollars out into the global circulation, and the price of the dollar has fallen. Now, a lot of times commodity brokers and traders and analysts talk about the strength of the dollar. And the reason why that matters, it doesn't necessarily matter at all domestically. If you're feeding cattle corn and you're going to slaughter those cattle in this country and sell the meat in this country, well, the value of the dollar relative to the euro doesn't matter. But if you are selling grain, or if you're selling meat overseas, if you're doing any business with another country, which of course all exports are, the value of the dollar makes a huge impact, because the cheaper the dollar is on the international stage, the farther a foreign country's dollar, or peso or whatever goes in buying our products. So the reason we're seeing exports stay so strong is because the dollar has gotten and stayed so weak. I expect this to continue. As of right now, again, mid-December, we're talking about another stimulus package. I just got a flash update on my phone. Will you get $600, $700, or $1,200? Well, who knows? Well, you might by now, sitting there on January 5th. I don't at present know if anybody is going to get anything, but the assumption is somebody will get something and more dollars will enter the financial ecosystem, thus keeping the value of the dollar down. This should help us maintain a very strong export pace, and importantly, this should help us meet our goal with shipments, because that's where the money changes hands. That's where things get interesting. Now, I've talked a lot about China, and I am very export focused today. We'll talk about ethanol and some of the domestic things that are happening as well before we quit. But we're not done talking global. Excuse me. There is another global trend, and this is something we've been seeing for quite a little while, and this speaks to the growing wealth of people around the world. Veggie oil consumption. This continues to grow. Palm oil continues to be the water carrier, right? I mean, that's Southeast Asia. Malaysia is where this thing really develops. The palm oil continues to grow. We are seeing more palm oil created, more plantations each and every year. This is a competitor to soybean oil, something we've got to keep our eye on. But the global oil market continues to expand. Now, the oil market, when we're looking at consumption behaviors for people, the more oil they're willing to consume, and you can look at this with veg oil or butter, right? I mean, the two comparable substances for cooking. The more of these we add, typically, the more it signifies our wealth, right? These things make food taste better. So as we can afford them, we add them to our diets and they stay there. So consumption climbs and then plateaus. 2020, we can see it's a plateau year. A lot of people globally who were doing okay before COVID have been knocked on their tails. America, Canada, Europe, we've been spared a lot of the very, very worst aspects of COVID thanks to an involved government, right? Stimulus checks, monetary policy, fiscal policy, dropping interest rates to zero, blah, blah, blah. We've gotten a lot of benefit. If you're in Southeast Asia, if you're in parts of Africa, if you're in Eastern Europe and COVID comes to town, you just do what you can, right? And so those are people, they're not probably investing in some higher quality cooking experiences in 2020, but they know it's out there and they're going to give it another taste. I like watching veg oil, not because a tiny percentage in this is going to massively change our producer's bottom line, or your producer's bottom line rather, but because to me, it's one more way of measuring global wealth. And one of the things that is always tied to higher prices and greater choices for producers is consumers having more money. And that's a fact. So this is something I like to see. I'll be watching for 2021 to see that consumption trend on the increase as well to make sure things aren't totally ruined. Now, I want to come domestic for just a second, and I want to take a quick look at ethanol, because ethanol has really been shunted to the side. This was a huge story at the initial part of the lockdowns. We saw ethanol plants closing right and left. We saw ethanol production absolutely decline. We can see the spike here, see the drop there in 2020. Massive drop. Folks just quit driving. What does that mean going forward? What does that mean for the corn market in 2021? And what can we expect going forward? Because ethanol has been the heavy lifter in the commodity complex. Ethanol is what has driven us. If ethanol, the boom times are ending, what's coming? Well, I think exports are going to be coming, but I think ethanol isn't dead yet. This is coming back. The ethanol market, this is a respected ethanol analyst, and they take a look, they look out long term. With this vaccine coming, people are going to be crazy to get out. They're going to go start driving. We are going to see demand pick back up. Now, they do still have 2021 ethanol demand down below 2019. Not shocking. A lot of folks who have gone home are going to be staying home for good. If you work for Twitter or any of these tech giants or, you name it, a lot of folks are just going to be working. There is no more commute. Miles are going to be down. This is a concern, but I think if ethanol production is going to drop off, 2020, 2021 is a fine place for it to do so because we actually need all of that corn for the export market. If ethanol plants were currently trying to fight China for corn, they would lose. Given the price of crude oil right now, given the enthusiasm for corn, I would not want to be making that bet right now. Bidding on corn, bidding against the Chinese. But it's going to come back. Ethanol's not going anywhere. It is still vital for clean air in this country. However, longer term, we need to be wary. Electric car sales continue to surge. If you would have asked me in 2016 if electric cars would be 5% of the American fleet by 2020, I would have said you're insane. It wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. There's no way. Batteries are terrible. The price is too high. Well, innovation happened. And we've seen a big move towards electric vehicles. The electric vehicle trend isn't a threat that I want to lose any sleep over for another 10 years. But it is something I want to have in the back of my mind. The long-term threat to ethanol is right here. Until we can figure out how to generate power with ethanol, we are going to continue to lose ground with these electric vehicles. The battery technology will continue to improve. The ride comfort will continue. The charging time will come down. This is the biggest threat ethanol is facing, and growers need to be aware of this, particularly if their chief marketing option is an ethanol plant. It's time to start thinking out of the box. It's not time to turn our backs yet. Ethanol is still vital. It's still going to suck up 8 billion bushels of corn this next year. But longer term, we need to start branching out and putting some eggs in some different baskets. The good news is, as we start to branch out, 2021 could be very, very interesting. Now, I want to spend just a second before I go taking a look at this slide. What we're looking at here are total checkable deposits in the United States. And we're going back to the start of 2019. Look at that spike. This isn't money that the Fed has printed that is sitting in a vault at the Chicago Fed. This is money that was issued by Uncle Sam and direct deposited in the checking accounts of Americans across the country. We have added $1 billion to the amount of capital Americans have to spend. Now, granted, this was at August. Well, very shortly, we'll have another update as to what to expect here at the end of the year. I predict it has probably come down a little bit as we've burned through some of this working capital. But even if we've burned through a quarter of this federal stimulus money from August to December, we are still up $750 million trillion dollars in total checking deposits. Folks, that money will come out at some point. It will come out of those checking accounts and it will be spent on stuff. This is where inflation starts to pick up. Now, I'm going out on a limb here. Folks, analysts, investors have been calling for an inflationary spike since 2008. And so far, it has not materialized. It hasn't happened. Inflation has been well below 2% for the entire past 13 years. What makes 2020, 2021 different? There are a few factors that I'm keeping my eye on. The first is the massive move higher in equities. To me, that's a sign of a population with a lot of capital looking for a return. So they pile into equities first. Oh, we all got in cheap in March, and now we've pushed this thing up to record highs. Property values, real assets are maintaining their value very, very well, with a few exceptions, such as a small apartment in a central city where just people don't want to live due to COVID. Almost every other type of property, and commercial real estate kind of struggling. Residential real estate is hot right now. That tells me that people have financial resources and they want to put them into hard assets. They want to own assets, real estate, equities, commodities. We're seeing it with gold. We're seeing it with silver. At what point will that broad investor interest spill into the ags? I don't know specifically or exactly, but I believe that it will. I think we are due for an inflationary spike in 2021 because we have $1 trillion more of hot money floating around our economy, because we have a globe full of people that have been shuttered in their homes to varying levels of severity since March, and we finally have something to do, right? COVID is ended. We can finally go outside. This is what I think the inflationary spike is going to come from. If the vaccines don't work, I'm not terribly worried about inflation. I think we will slowly, gradually chew through this increase in our checkable deposits. It will take all of that it can take to survive a COVID pandemic if the vaccines fail. If, however, the vaccines work, all of a sudden, say by June, we could have a country free to go around again, free to walk, free to go back to work, free to innovate, free to sit at the bar, free to go on an airplane, free to start generating value one more time. And I think when that happens, all of that money is going to come out at once. And that's going to trip the trigger, and the Fed won't be able to react terribly quickly. We can't afford to raise interest rates too terribly much and still have the government afford to pay the bills. So the government's going to be kind of constrained. If inflation takes off, I think it will take off severely, and I think it will run for some time. As I'm working with growers, prepping for 2021, I want to prep for a runaway inflation environment. I don't want to plan for it, right? I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket, because inflation soothsayers like myself have been wrong for 12 years. But I think this time is different. I do. And I want to have that dry powder ready in case things do take off. The supply and demand picture in 2021 is cloudy. We know supplies have been impacted globally and domestically. And we know that demand has been shifted. Whether it's up or down, we're still trying to suss out, but it is certainly in different places, and we're meeting that demand from new sources. China sourcing everything from Brazil, now sourcing everything from the US. Global trade flows are in flux. All of these create challenges and they create opportunities. As your growers prepare for this next year, let's prepare like things could go bad, because they obviously could. We're all in agriculture. We've all had the greatest day planned, and you blow a hydraulic pump first thing in the morning and your day is shot. Things can always get worse. Growers need to be wary of that. Let's not ride this rally all the way back down. But let's also not sell everything all at once. Let's let this virus percolate. Let's let this vaccine percolate, Let's let this vaccine percolate, see if it does the trick. Because if it does, hold on to your hats. We could be off on a roller coaster of a ride in 2021. So let's keep that powder dry. Let's keep our options open. Let's make some sales when it makes sense. Most importantly, let's be grateful that in spite of everything, in 2020, we've survived, we've made it through to 2021, and we'll get to work with growers to help them do the very same thing. Folks, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. Mark, I really appreciate it. And to all of you watching, let's raise a glass to those of you in 2021, from those of us here in 2020. May your life be less interesting in 2021. Thanks so much.
Mike, thank you so much. Truly valuable content. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you've been challenged and learned something new and discovered ideas that will help you elevate your business. Don't forget, come back tomorrow at 6:30 to hear from Doctors Brent Gloy and Rick Rigsby. Have a great evening.